When Clint Eastwood walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage, he wasn't just promoting a film. He was carrying decades of unfiltered American defiance. But what began as a casual interview spiraled into a live clash over freedom, truth, and the cost of silence. Maggie, his longtime aide, had warned them, "Don't push him." They didn't listen, and what happened next turned late-night television into a battleground. This wasn't just about a chair. It was about who still deserves a seat at the table. The green room was colder than it should have been. Not the air conditioning, something else. A quiet tension, like the stillness before a wildfire sweeps through dry brush. Clint Eastwood sat alone in a steel-backed chair, the kind too modern for a man who'd ridden through time on leather saddles and gunmetal resolve. In his weathered hands, a single sheet of paper, thin, white, trembling slightly under his grip. 5 lines typed in clean studio font. Topics to avoid. Politics. The 2012 RNC speech, gun control, civil rights protests, voting history. His thumb hovered over the last item, pressing gently as if testing the edge of a blade. Maggie stood a few feet away, arms crossed, back rigid. She had been with him through 5 presidencies, 2 marriages, and the endless cycle of Hollywood reinvention. If anyone knew when Clint was about to snap, it was her. Her voice was low and firm, directed at the young producer in a headset who had wandered too close with a nervous smile. "Don't try to be cute," she said. "Don't cue a joke. Don't chase a viral moment. If you corner him, he won't play, and no script in this building will be able to fix it." The producer blinked, half-laughed, then caught her eyes. The laughter died in his throat. He nodded, retreated, and disappeared behind a curtain like a child backing away from a growling dog. Maggie turned back toward Clint, who still hadn't spoken, just staring at the paper. His eyes weren't angry, not yet, but something in his jaw, the tension, the slow grind, made her uneasy. From the hallway came the thump of the studio band rehearsal. The bass line carried like a war drum, echoing off concrete and plaster. Maggie looked down at her watch. 7 minutes until call. Clint folded the note slowly, precisely, like it was something sacred or cursed, then slipped it into the inner pocket of his blazer. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "They're going to try something." It wasn't a question. Maggie stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Yes, they are." Clint nodded once. That was all. Across the hall, through a partially open door, a pair of producers argued in hushed voices. One was older, polished, the kind who wore suits even behind the scenes. The other was younger, hoodie and sneakers, hair in calculated chaos. "We need something big," the young one said. He's been a meme before. "The chair thing. It's gold, just a clip. A 30-second throwback. Trust me, it'll explode." The older one hesitated. "It's risky," he muttered. "He's unpredictable. That's what makes it work." The younger one grinned. Back in the green room, Clint rose, slow, deliberate, like he was preparing for a duel, not a sit-down interview. Maggie handed him a small paper cup of black coffee. He took it, sipped once, then placed it untouched on the side table. She watched him adjust his collar, pull the blazer snug across his shoulders. The note was still there, tucked over his heart like a warning label no one else could read. The stage manager appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, face tight with forced cheer. 2 minutes, Mr. Eastwood. You're up after the monologue." Clint gave no reply. He stepped past without a word, boots echoing softly against the tile. Maggie followed half a step behind as they neared the stage entrance. The laughter from Jimmy's opening monologue bled through the curtain, something about celebrity scandals. The audience roared on cue. Clint stopped. His eyes narrowed. His head tilted slightly toward the sound. He stood like that for 10 full seconds, unmoving. Maggie recognized the stance. The pause before a storm, the breath before the gun is drawn. Behind them, the hallway emptied. Studio staff gave them wide berth. Everyone knew who he was, but more importantly, they knew what he could do when provoked. Maggie leaned in close. "Just talk about the film," she whispered. "If they poke, don't swing first." Clint looked at her, and for a moment the faintest trace of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Then it was gone. The stage manager raised a hand, counting down with fingers. 3, 2, 1. The curtain began to rise. The band kicked in with a brassy riff. Jimmy's voice echoed over the cheers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself." And Clint stepped forward into the light. Backstage, just beyond the curtain's edge, the studio swelled with noise and light. The crowd was still buzzing from Jimmy's monologue, laughter clinging to the rafters like static. The band held a note just long enough to signal the transition. Smooth, planned. A show built on rails, but behind the precision timing and cue cards, in the dim hallway lined with cables and clipboards, a storm was brewing. Inside the control room, two producers stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the feed through tinted glass. The younger one, Nate, bounced slightly on his heels, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. His eyes flicked from screen to screen, hunting for energy, for angles, for the moment. "He's walking out right now," Nate said. "Look at the crowd. They're eating it up. You throw the chair bit in here, we've got instant gold." Beside him, the older producer, Reed, didn't move. His jaw flexed, the only visible sign of tension. Reed had seen careers implode over stunts like this. Viral was good until it blew back. "Don't do it," he said. "It's not even political," Nate argued. "It's nostalgic, iconic." "One little clip and we've got Twitter hooked for 2 days straight," Nate said. Reed shot him a glance. "You think he sees it that way?" Nate smirked. "He's an actor. He'll play." Reed didn't reply. Instead, he leaned into the mic that fed the floor crew. "Tight camera on Kimmel. Do not cut to Eastwood without my call." Meanwhile, Maggie stood just off stage, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes were fixed on Clint, who had taken his seat under the studio lights. She wasn't watching the host, the crowd, or the chaos in the control room. She was watching his breathing, the way his hands rested. Not loose, not clenched, but ready. Like a man who'd walked into a poker game and already smelled the bluff. Jimmy's voice danced through the studio. He was in his rhythm, playing to the crowd, switching between charm and jab with seasoned ease, the kind of host who made even discomfort sound like banter, and Clint gave him nothing. Not resistance, not amusement, just stillness. Behind the scenes, Nate moved to a separate monitor and tapped on a cue file labeled Eastwood RNC12. The thumbnail froze on that infamous image, Clint on stage, gesturing to an empty chair. A decade old, but still electric, still divisive. "This goes in at minute 4, Nate said, half to himself. "Set it up like a throwback." Jimmy jokes, crowd laughs, we roll the clip. Boom. Viral. Reed stepped in front of the screen, blocking his view. "That's not the play," he said. "Why not?" "Because that chair is still hot." "That was 10 years ago and the country hasn't cooled off," Reed snapped. Nate laughed under his breath. Not mocking, just dismissive. "Come on, man. He's been memed to death. You think he doesn't expect it?" "This is late night, not PBS." Reed didn't blink. "I think he's the kind of guy who remembers exactly who laughed and why." Back near the curtain, a production assistant leaned toward Maggie, whispering, "They're prepping the RNC clip." She didn't react right away, just blinked once. "Are they insane?" The assistant shrugged helplessly. "Orders came from up top. Ratings are down this week. They want a spike." Maggie turned her gaze back to Clint. He was answering a question now, voice calm, even. Something about the land in his new film, The Ranch. The quiet fight over property rights. It was subtle, but Maggie caught the edge. He was already laying track, drawing the line between fiction and truth, between the character and himself, and they were about to cross it. Back in the control room, the director's voice cut through the feed. "Stand by on clip 3. Ready, playback." Reed clenched his fists. "Don't push it," he said quietly. Nate ignored him. He was too far gone, already imagining headlines. Eastwood returns to the chair, 10 years later. It wrote itself. The stage manager's voice crackled through the headset. "Host is ready to pivot." Reed reached for the comm. "Don't." Too late. Jimmy leaned forward, smile tight. "So, Clint, before we get too serious, let's take a quick walk down memory lane." Clint's eyes didn't shift. "A decade ago," Jimmy continued, "you gave a little impromptu speech at a certain national convention. About a chair." The crowd chuckled, uncertain if it was safe to laugh. Maggie whispered under her breath, "Don't do it. Don't you dare." Jimmy turned to the screen behind them. "Let's take a look." The studio lights dimmed for the clip, but the temperature didn't drop. It rose. Clint didn't move a muscle. Not his face, not his body. But something changed. A silence that wasn't scripted. A stillness that wasn't passive. Maggie felt it in her chest. The room was about to detonate. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at Clint, and Clint was looking at Jimmy. The lights came back up with a cue, soft, golden, warm. The band's final chord faded into polite applause as Jimmy turned back toward his guest, with a smile practiced enough to smooth marble. Across from him, Clint Eastwood leaned back, spine straight, eyes steady, one boot slightly forward like he was bracing for uneven ground. "It's an honor to have you here," Jimmy said, tone bright, almost reverent. "You've got a new film out. Tell us about it. What drew you back to the director's chair?" Clint didn't move at first. Then slowly he tilted his head toward Jimmy, voice low and even. "I never left." The audience chuckled. A few clapped, unsure if it was a punchline. Jimmy grinned, nodding like he'd expected it. "The film's about a rancher, right? A man protecting his land from a corporate takeover." Clint gave a small nod. "It's about standing your ground." Jimmy latched onto the phrase. "A metaphor for something bigger." Clint paused. "No, just the ground." Another ripple of laughter, lighter this time. Jimmy smiled again, but the edges were tight. He pivoted. "Now this rancher, he anything like you?" Clint shrugged. "He minds his own business until someone gives him a reason not to." That line landed. The crowd hummed with it. Maggie, watching from the wings, exhaled through her nose. She'd heard it in rehearsal, knew it was coming. Still gave her chills. Jimmy tapped his pen against the desk. "There's a line in the trailer, something about freedom not being free." Clint said nothing. "You've always had a thing for that kind of talk," Jimmy continued. "Freedom, justice, gunslingers. But I'm curious, how do you see that now? I mean, with everything going on these days." There it was. Clint's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. The pause stretched between them. The audience stilled, sensing the shift. "Freedom," Clint said, "isn't about what you carry. It's about knowing when you don't need to." Jimmy blinked. "So, you mean guns aren't freedom?" Clint continued. "The ability to not reach for one. That's the part nobody wants to talk about." A few murmurs from the audience. Someone clapped. Someone else hissed. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, shifting in his seat, trying to play it off. "Let's switch gears for a second." He smiled too brightly. "You've been in this business for decades. Started with TV westerns, made your name with Dirty Harry. Did you ever imagine back then you'd still be making films at your age?" Clint looked at him. Not smiling, not annoyed, just looking. "Did you ever imagine," Clint said evenly, "you'd still be asking questions that dodged the point?" The crowd tensed. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it cut deep. Jimmy laughed too quickly. "All right, I guess I walked into that one." He leaned back, regrouping, picked up a cue card like it was a lifeline. Clint didn't look away. His posture hadn't shifted an inch. Backstage, Maggie tilted her head, eyes narrowing. She could feel the tremor in the air. The host trying to stay in control, the guest refusing to let him. Jimmy cleared his throat. "I read somewhere that you still ride horses every morning." "That's true, some folks still carry a six-shooter." Clint didn't answer right away. Then with zero inflection he said, "You watch too many movies." The audience laughed again, this time nervously. Jimmy chuckled with them, but behind his grin was a flicker of something else. Irritation maybe, or realization. All right, he said, trying to recover. "Just giving the fans what they want." Clint looked out at the audience, then back at Jimmy. "Are you?" Jimmy raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, we love you, man. We just want to hear the stories, the good ones, the real ones. Then stop cutting the edges off them." The words dropped like a weight. Not angry, not loud, but they didn't need to be. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it again. From the shadows, Maggie shook her head slightly. Not because Clint had gone too far, but because she knew he was just getting started. The laughter thinned. Not gone, just stretched. Brittle around the edges, like glass under pressure. Jimmy shuffled his cue cards with practiced flair, but his fingers tapped a beat too fast against the desk. Clint hadn't moved, still, calm. But the air around him buzzed, not with anger or performance, but with presence. Heavy, unblinking. Jimmy tried again, voice a shade too light. "So, Clint, we've been talking about your new film. Grit, land, justice, classic themes. But that's not the first time you've spoken out about the state of things." A few audience members chuckled, sensing where he was headed. "I mean, come on," Jimmy said with a grin. "Who could forget the infamous chair speech? A ripple of mixed reaction. Some laughter, some groans. Jimmy pressed on. You remember that one, right? 2012 Republican National Convention? You walked on stage and gave a speech to. What was it again? The conscience of America? He laughed. A few people joined in, but it didn't catch. The sound scattered instead of spreading. Clint looked at him, then at the monitor as it flickered to life behind them. Grainy footage filled the screen. The now iconic image of Clint Eastwood standing beside an empty chair, gesturing, improvising, firing off lines about invisible politicians and broken promises. It had been memed, mocked, dissected, debated. For younger viewers, it was a clip. For Clint, it was a scar. For those who watched it live, it was something else entirely. A fracture in the cultural bedrock. Jimmy gestured toward the screen. Let's take a look, shall we? The lights dimmed. The clip played. The voice of a younger Clint filled the studio. Rough, unfiltered, defiant. In the shadows, Maggie tensed. She didn't need to look to know what was coming. When the lights came back up, Jimmy was already leaning forward. So tell us, Clint, who were you really talking to that night? The president? The voters, or just a chair? The audience laughed, louder this time, grateful for something familiar to hold on to. Clint didn't laugh, didn't blink. I was talking to a hole, he said softly. Jimmy blinked. Pardon? Clint leaned forward. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I was talking to the hollow space left behind when leadership stops listening. The room went still. When politics becomes noise instead of action, he continued. When men shake hands on camera and stab backs behind closed doors. That chair wasn't empty by accident. It was empty by design. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward. Others leaned back. Jimmy tried to steer it back. Yeah, but surely you knew it'd stir things up, right? That people might, I don't know, misinterpret it? Clint's eyes narrowed slightly. People don't misinterpret silence. They fear it. Because silence makes them fill in the blanks themselves. The tension now hung thick in the air, clinging to the rafters. Jimmy glanced toward the producer's booth, then back at Clint. Come on, Clint, that night, a lot of folks thought you went off script, that maybe you lost the thread. Clint's voice cut clean through the noise. The thread was already lost, he said. I just pointed to the hole it unraveled from. A ripple of reaction. A few claps. A few quiet dams. Jimmy's grin faltered. He leaned back in his chair laughing. But this time, it didn't sound like laughter at all. Well, Jimmy said, forcing a smile. I guess we won't be rolling that clip again anytime soon. Clint didn't respond. You know, Jimmy tried. His voice light. You're kind of proving my point. We can't even joke about a chair anymore without starting a riot. Maybe it's just TV, maybe it's not that deep. Clint's gaze swept the audience, slow and measured. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried. That's the problem. You think because it's on a screen, it's safe. You think the lights make it less real? Turned back to Jimmy. But when people stop expecting anything from that chair, when they stop believing someone will ever sit in it and listen, that's when the country starts to rot. The crowd went still. Not frozen, just breathing differently now. Listening. Backstage, Maggie's hands were clenched at her sides. She knew this wasn't about a film or a clip or a late-night bit gone sideways. This was a man dragging a symbol back into the light and showing everyone the rot beneath the varnish. Jimmy exhaled sharply. Okay, Clint, you've made your point. Just a chair? No. Clint leaned in. His voice was steel now. Not just a chair. A mirror. For a split second, Jimmy Kimmel had nothing to say. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was taut, alive, stretched thin between them. No one moved. Not the band. Not the crew. Not the audience. Jimmy sat blinking under the lights as if they'd suddenly gotten brighter. Then with a forced shrug, he leaned forward. All right, he said carefully. So the chair was a mirror. Fair enough. He tried a smile that didn't quite land. But since we're already cracking the seal on uncomfortable truths, let's go one more round. He shifted in his seat. You talk about leadership, about silence, about people being left out. But let me ask you, when the country erupted in protest, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of it, where were you? A murmur rippled through the audience. Backstage, Maggie stiffened. You believe in freedom, right? Jimmy pressed. In standing your ground? So why not stand with them? Why not say Black Lives Matter? Clint didn't flinch, didn't blink. He looked at Jimmy like a man weighing a question thrown too carelessly. Freedom, he said quietly, isn't something you rent for a protest. You either own it or you don't. Jimmy opened his mouth, but Clint kept going. You want to talk about standing up? Fine. Let's talk about all the folks who marched, who chanted, who raised signs for cameras, then turned off their conscience when the feed ended. The hush deepened. The audience was split now, some leaning forward, some crossing their arms. Clint's tone stayed calm, but every word was honed to a razor edge. You think freedom has a color? It doesn't. But hypocrisy sure as hell does. It wears whatever cause is trending that week, wrapped in slogans, sold in hashtags, gasps, a few cheers, a few boos. The room fractured, no longer an audience, but two halves of a reaction. Clint didn't move. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. I'm not here to play sainthood with the left or martyrdom with the right. I've seen too many flags waved by men who never bled for anything real. Jimmy's grin was back, but brittle now, more reflex than expression. So what, you don't support protest? I support people who live what they shout, Clint said. Who show up when the cameras leave, the rest? Noise. The crowd stirred again, applause, jeers, shouts colliding into static. A woman in the front row half rose, then sat back down, shaking her head. Maggie muttered under her breath. There's no commercial break big enough to clean this up. Jimmy adjusted his collar. But don't you think silence sometimes equals complicity? Clint nodded once. Sometimes. But shouting empty words? That's complicity too, just dressed prettier. The air was electric now, humming with tension. Clint didn't raise his voice, but every sentence hit like a drop of lead into water. Jimmy forced a laugh. You sure know how to rile a crowd. They're not riled, Clint said evenly. They're waking up. The floor producer was signaling frantically to the control booth. Cut. Go to break. But upstairs the numbers were climbing. Someone was watching them soar. Jimmy glanced toward the crew, then back at Clint. So what would you have done? If not take a knee or hold a sign, then what? What's the right way to stand up? Clint's eyes swept the room, his voice dipping lower, almost intimate. The right way? You live it. You vote like it matters. You work like your name's on the laws. You teach your kids to see people, not colors. And you don't wait for a hashtag to care about justice. The room erupted. Applause, protests, murmurs crashing together like a tide. Jimmy shook his head. You talk like the system's already broken. Clint's reply was quiet. Not bitter, just true. It was never whole. Maggie closed her eyes for a beat. She'd seen Clint make speeches before, seen him stir crowds, shake rooms, but this was different. This wasn't showmanship, this was a man cutting open the air with truth like a scalpel. And no one, not the host, not the audience, not the world watching, was safe from it. His fingers tapped the desk, once, twice. No rhythm, just noise. Clint didn't move. Shoulders square, posture carved in stone. He wasn't looking at Jimmy anymore. His eyes were fixed straight into the camera. The red light blinked live. That chair, he said quietly, wasn't for a president. It was for the people no one talks about once the confetti swept up and the slogans rot in the sun. The words came steady, stripped of showmanship. That chair's for the ones working 2 jobs and still losing the house. For the vet who can't afford a therapist. For the mother whose kid didn't come home from school. Not because of grades, but bullets. The audience, stunned seconds ago, rippled to life. A woman in the front row rose halfway, hand over her mouth. Applause started, scattered, unsteady. But just as many boos cut through it. The air cracked with division. No cue cards could contain this. From the wings, Maggie watched, pale and tight-jawed. She saw Jimmy glance toward the control booth, eyes silently begging for help. The floor manager froze, headset askew, muttering orders that no one followed. Clint kept speaking, his voice calm but wired with conviction. You want to know who I was talking to that night? That empty chair? I was talking to ghosts, 1 million of them. Americans erased from the conversation because they don't fit the headline. Not loud enough. Not photogenic. Not useful. He leaned closer to the lens, eyes locked on the blinking light. And they're still gone. Still unseen. Because both sides would rather scream at each other than listen to the people they claim to fight for. The crowd erupted again, some standing and clapping, others shouting him down. No music, no cut to commercial, no way to soften the edges. Jimmy sat motionless behind his desk, palms flat, jaw set. It was his stage, his name, his show, yet in that moment none of it belonged to him. Maggie took a cautious step forward from the wings, enough to catch Clint's eye to signal it was time. But he raised a hand, a small, steady motion. Not yet. Then he stood. Half the audience fell silent, like someone had turned down the sound but left the static. He turned toward the camera again, voice low but resonant. That chair's not empty anymore. The words struck like a hammer against steel. They didn't need explanation. They hung, echoing, alive. He held the silence. Let it breathe. Let it sting. Maggie exhaled slowly. No smile, just something in her eyes, somewhere between pride and heartbreak. She had warned them, not because Clint was unpredictable, but because he was precise. Behind her, chaos ignited. A junior producer fumbled with a tablet. Another shouted about ad slots. Someone yelled about the sponsors. No one listened. Jimmy finally stood. Not to reclaim control, but because sitting felt wrong now. He looked at Clint, then the audience, then the empty chair beside his desk. For the first time all night, he had nothing to say. Clint gave a single nod, turned, and walked off stage. The reaction behind him was thunder. Part applause, part outrage, all of it real. Outside, the air was colder than expected, sharp enough to cut. Clint stepped through the side door, the echo of the crowd still pulsing through the studio walls. He didn't look back, didn't speak. Just walked, slow and steady, hands at his sides, each step deliberate like a man used to the silence after fire. Maggie followed, her heels clicking once for every two of his. She didn't rush, didn't try to fill the space. He'd said enough for one night, maybe for a decade. Behind them, the studio lights flickered like an engine dying on its own exhaust. Inside, chaos reigned. Producers shouting, PR teams drafting apologies before the outro even rolled. The next guest canceled. The next segment scrapped. But online, the moment had already escaped. Within 90 seconds, the clip of Clint walking off stage was up. Uncut, unfiltered. Just that wide shot of him leaving the chair behind. The crowd splitting like a tide. By the 5-minute mark, hashtags were trending. Clint was right. Eastwood eruption. Chair no longer empty. The numbers climbed in real time. Millions by midnight, cable news split fast. One conservative anchor called it the most disrespectful moment in live TV history, branding Clint a relic chasing relevance. A left-leaning commentator countered, dangerous because he made too much sense. And somewhere in the middle, on a small independent podcast, a quiet voice said, it might have been the most honest 5 minutes on television in 10 years. Maggie caught up to Clint at the waiting SUV. She didn't touch him, just walked beside him. You always know, don't you? She said softly. How to make the room go silent. Not by yelling, just by telling the truth. He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. Behind them, the banner on the studio wall fluttered hard in the wind. The corner ripped loose. Jimmy's smiling face folded backward on itself. The word live tore straight down the middle, flapping like an open wound. Maggie turned to look. Clint didn't. He paused at the curb, eyes lifting toward the night sky. A helicopter blinked red against the clouds. Below, the city buzzed. Horns, engines, voices, America moving too fast to notice the silence it left behind. Clint exhaled. Back inside, Jimmy stumbled through the closing lines. The crowd's laughter came late, uncertain, habit without heart. The outro music blared too bright, too loud, trying to drown out what couldn't be undone. But it couldn't touch the image already burning across every screen in the country. A man walking away from the spotlight, like he never needed it and never would again. As the SUV door shut, sealing the noise outside, the camera phones kept rolling. Clint didn't wave, didn't nod, just stared ahead as the studio lights vanished in the rearview mirror. Somewhere behind him, that chair still sat on the stage, but it wasn't empty anymore. Not really.